The Millionaire CEO fired his assistant, only to realize she was the one who saved him. The city never really slept, but from the penthouse office of Cole Enterprises, it often looked like it did. Ethan Cole stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the glow of Manhattan fade into a scatter of headlights below. He didn't notice the beauty of it anymore. He only measured time by meetings missed and deals signed. At 38, Ethan was the picture of success, a self-made billionaire, his name emblazoned on skyscrapers and magazine covers with headlines like The Relentless Visionary. But up close, the Polish cracked. His life was structured, sterile. No warmth, no pauses, just constant motion. Relationships were distractions, friendships liabilities, and love? A weakness he'd long since buried under ambition. The click of heels pulled him back to the present. Claire Bennett, his assistant, entered with her usual calm efficiency, though tonight there was something different in her expression, a tightness around her eyes, a hesitation in her step. She carried not a stack of files, not his coffee, but a single slip of paper. She placed it on his desk without a word, her movements precise but heavy. "What's this?" Ethan asked, barely glancing up from his laptop. "Your sister called. She said you missed the charity dinner tonight," Claire replied, her voice steady but low, like she was bracing herself. Ethan's eyes flickered to the clock, 9:47 p.m. He had, in fact, forgotten. Again. His sister, Emily, had organized the fundraiser months ago, expecting him to attend. He had promised he would. Another promise broken. "She thought you'd show up," Claire added softly, her words carrying a weight that made Ethan's shoulders tense. "Noted," he said flatly, turning back toward the city skyline, dismissing the conversation. "Noted?" For the first time in 5 years, Claire's calm cracked. Her voice rose, sharp with an emotion Ethan couldn't immediately place. "Ethan, she was counting on you. She told me she's tired of being the only one in the family who still tries." Ethan's jaw clenched. He hated personal lectures, especially from his assistant. Claire was efficient, indispensable even, but this was overstepping. "I don't need reminders about my family," he said, his tone ice-cold. "That's not your job." She exhaled, frustration flashing in her hazel eyes. "Maybe someone needs to remind you you're human, because lately it feels like all you see are numbers and contracts. People don't matter to you anymore, not even the ones who love you." The room went still. Ethan's gaze hardened. No one spoke to him like that. Not investors, not board members, not even his family. But Claire always had. Maybe that's why she had lasted 5 years in a position most assistants didn't survive for 6 months. She wasn't just competent. She was fearless in her quiet way, always ready to call him out when he crossed a line. But tonight, she had gone too far. "You're overstepping," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "If you can't remember your role here, maybe you don't belong here at all." Claire froze, her breath catching. Then she straightened, her shoulders squaring as if steeling herself. Her voice trembled only slightly. "So that's it? You fire people for caring too much." "I fire people for forgetting boundaries," he snapped, the words cutting through the air like a blade. "Pack your things." Her lips parted as if to say something more, but she stopped herself. Her eyes searched his for a moment, looking for something. Regret, hesitation, anything. Finding nothing, she nodded once, her expression closing off. "Fine, I'll be gone by morning." She turned and walked out, her heels echoing faintly in the empty office. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed pressed against the glass walls like a living thing. Ethan told himself it was relief, that finally one less person would be challenging him, slowing him down. But as the night dragged on, the city lights blurring into a cold haze, he felt something unsettling in his chest. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure he had done the right thing. And yet, pride kept him still. He didn't know it then. But the woman who had just walked out of his office, fired, dismissed, erased from his empire, was the same one who would save him in ways money never could. The following morning, Ethan Cole's office felt wrong. It wasn't anything obvious at first. The coffee still arrived, delivered by a nervous temp worker. The files still sat stacked neatly on his desk, though slightly askew. But the rhythm of his day was fractured. Claire had been the quiet pulse of his empire, the one who filled in the gaps before he even noticed them. She anticipated his needs, caught his oversights, smoothed the edges of his temper. Now there were gaps everywhere. At 9:15, his board meeting began 10 minutes late because no one had reminded him of the time. At 11:30, a contract was missing from his folder, forcing him to stall in front of investors while a junior associate scrambled to find it. By 2:00, when his personal driver showed up at the wrong entrance because Claire wasn't there to coordinate, Ethan felt something foreign creep into his chest, frustration. But beneath it, a sharper ache, loneliness. It surprised him. He had told himself for years he didn't need anyone. He had built walls so high even his sister had stopped climbing them. Yet somehow Claire had slipped through the cracks, not by force, but by patience. She had been there through late nights and impossible deadlines, through his worst moods and rare victories. She had seen him at his most human and never flinched. And now, with her gone, he felt the absence like a missing limb. He didn't call her. Pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, he buried himself in work, longer hours, harder pushes, convincing himself he was fine. But the office whispered her name in every corner. Her handwriting lingered on old notes tucked into folders. Her scent, something soft like lavender, clung faintly to the chair she used to occupy outside his office door. He found himself pausing there once, staring at the empty space before shaking himself and moving on. 3 days later, the mistakes began to pile up. He walked into a negotiation without realizing the other party had changed terms in the fine print, something Claire would have caught instantly. The oversight cost Cole Enterprises millions. His board was furious, their voices sharp in the conference room. "Cole," one director snapped, "you've been off your game lately. What's going on?" "Nothing," Ethan replied curtly, his fingers tightening around his pen. But there was something. He just couldn't admit it. One night, long after midnight, he sat alone in his penthouse apartment. The city sprawled out beneath him, a glittering empire he had conquered. But for once, he didn't feel powerful, only small. He poured himself a glass of scotch, but it didn't warm him. His eyes wandered to his phone, where Claire's number still sat in his contacts. His thumb hovered over the call button. He almost dialed. Almost. Instead, he told himself she was probably relieved, that someone like her, kind, grounded, human, didn't belong in his cold, ruthless world anyway, that maybe she'd find a softer place to land, somewhere she wouldn't be punished for caring. He wanted to believe that. But a week later, at his sister's townhouse, reality hit him like a fist. Emily Cole greeted him at the door with folded arms, her expression cool. "Nice of you to show up for once." "I'm here now," Ethan muttered, brushing past her. "Claire used to remind you when it mattered," Emily shot back, her voice sharp enough to stop him in his tracks. "What happened to her?" "She won't return my calls." Ethan's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected Emily to notice Claire's absence so keenly. "She doesn't work for me anymore." "You fired her?" Emily's voice rose, incredulous. "Are you insane? She's the only reason you've kept your life halfway together. You don't see it, but she cared about you more than anyone else does. And you threw her away?" He had no answer, because Emily was right. That night, Ethan lay awake, her words echoing in his mind. Claire cared. She had always cared, not for his money or his power, but for him, the man behind the armor. She had seen the cracks he hid from the world and never once used them against him, and he had punished her for it. The realization stung. But life, as it often does, refused to let him ignore the truth. 2 weeks after firing her, Ethan received a call he didn't expect. "Mr. Cole?" A hesitant male voice came through the line. "This is Dr. Ramirez from St. Vincent's Hospital. We're calling because your former assistant, Claire Bennett, listed you as her emergency contact. She was admitted tonight." For a moment, Ethan's mind went blank. Then a rush of panic slammed into him faster than any deal, sharper than any failure. "What happened?" he demanded, already reaching for his coat. She collapsed on the subway platform. exhaustion, dehydration. We're still running tests, but she's stable. Someone needed to be notified. Ethan's breath caught. Claire had listed him. Even after everything? Even after he'd fired her, dismissed her, hurt her? He didn't wait another second. He grabbed his coat, left the penthouse without a word to anyone, and told his driver the only destination that mattered, St. Vincent's Hospital. The sterile white lights of St. Vincent's buzzed overhead as Ethan strode through the corridors, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum. He had walked into boardrooms worth billions with less fear than he carried now. At the front desk, he gave Claire's name, his voice clipped but unsteady. A nurse led him down the hall, past curtained bays and weary families. His chest tightened with every step, a suffocating pressure he couldn't shake. When they reached her room, the nurse pushed the door open gently. Claire lay on the narrow hospital bed, her skin pale against the white sheets, her breathing slow but steady. An IV ran into her arm and her hair, usually so neatly tied back, spilled loose across the pillow. She looked fragile in a way Ethan had never imagined her. Claire, who had always been the steady one, the unshakable one. For the first time in years, Ethan felt powerless. "Is she going to be all right?" he asked, his voice lower than he intended. "She's stable now," the nurse replied, her tone professional but kind. "Exhaustion, mostly, but she's been under severe stress. Has she been working long hours?" Ethan swallowed hard, guilt twisting in his gut. "Yes, for me." The nurse gave him a look, not cruel, just honest, that said more than words could. Then she left them alone. Ethan pulled up a chair, sitting beside her bed. For a long while he just stared, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. He thought of the countless times she had saved him from mistakes, covered for him when his temper cost him allies, reminded him of things that should have mattered, like his sister's charity dinners, or his mother's birthday, or the fact that he hadn't taken a real break in years. She had been his shield, his anchor, and he had dismissed her like she was nothing. Claire. His voice cracked, the sound foreign in his own throat. "What have I done to you?" She stirred hours later, her eyes blinking open slowly, confusion clouding them. When she saw him, she frowned faintly. "Ethan." "I'm here," he said quickly, leaning forward. "Don't talk. Just rest." Her lips curved into a tired half-smile. "That's new. You giving orders to rest." Despite everything, he let out a short laugh, relief washing over him like a wave. "You scared me." "You? Scared?" She whispered, her voice hoarse but teasing. "That's impossible." "Not when it comes to you," he admitted before he could stop himself. She blinked, her eyes searching his face as though trying to decide if she'd heard him right. But exhaustion pulled her back under, and soon she was asleep again, her breathing soft and even. Ethan stayed, all night. He canceled his meetings, ignored the buzzing of his phone. For once, the empire could run without him, because here, in this dimly lit hospital room, was the one person who mattered more than the millions he'd built his life around. The next morning, when Claire woke again, she found him still there, his suit jacket folded on the chair, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who hadn't wanted to. "You didn't leave," she whispered, her voice stronger now, but still surprised. "No." He rubbed a hand over his face, his usual composure fraying. "I wasn't going to." She studied him quietly, her gaze piercing in its clarity. "Why? You fired me, Ethan. You made it clear I wasn't needed." The words pierced him, sharp and merciless. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "I was wrong." Silence stretched between them. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't try to fill it with business or excuses. He let himself be vulnerable, let the weight of his mistakes settle in the space between them. "I fired you because you were right," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "You saw what I didn't want to see, that I was losing myself, that I'd already lost more than I realized." He hesitated, then forced the words out, each one costing him something. "You cared, and I didn't know how to handle that." Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady, unflinching. "You think money makes you invincible, Ethan, but it doesn't. It just hides the cracks. And the longer you pretend they aren't there, the deeper they get." He nodded slowly, his throat tight. "Then maybe I need someone who won't let me ignore them." Her brow furrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Ethan, I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight," he said quickly, raising a hand to stop her. I need you to know I see it now. What you've done for me. Who you are to me. You weren't just my assistant. You were—" His voice faltered, the words catching in his throat. "You were my compass. And without you, I've been lost." For the first time in years, Claire saw him not as the untouchable CEO, but as a man stripped bare, flawed, afraid, desperately human. And for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to be seen. Ethan Cole was not used to waiting. His entire life had been about moving forward, seizing control, dictating outcomes. But now, sitting in the quiet hospital room with Claire resting beside him, he discovered that some things couldn't be forced. Some things had to be earned, slowly, humbly. She stayed for 2 more days under observation. Ethan barely left her side, much to the confusion of the nurses who whispered about the billionaire CEO sitting vigil like a worried husband. He ignored the stares, the gossip, the speculation. His world had narrowed to one person, and for once he didn't care what anyone else thought. On the morning she was discharged, Claire tried to protest when he insisted on driving her home. "I can manage," she said firmly, adjusting her coat as they stood in the hospital lobby. Ethan shook his head, his expression resolute. Not this time. Their car ride was mostly silent. The city bustled around them, horns honking, lights flashing, but between them hung an unspoken tension, the weight of all the words still unsaid. When they reached her modest apartment building, Claire hesitated before getting out, her hand lingering on the door handle. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice guarded but not unkind. "Claire," he began, but she stopped him with a look. "Don't," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "Don't make promises you can't keep." And with that, she left him standing in the shadow of her doorway, more shaken than any hostile takeover had ever left him. For weeks after, Ethan wrestled with himself. He buried himself in work again, but something had shifted. The board noticed it in his quieter demeanor. His sister noticed it in the way he actually showed up to family dinners. Even the press began speculating about his sudden retreat from the spotlight, wondering if the relentless visionary was losing his edge. But Ethan knew the truth. Nothing mattered if he couldn't make things right with Claire. One evening, Emily Cole cornered him at a family dinner, her wine glass in hand and her eyes sharp with the kind of insight only a sibling could wield. "You look miserable," she said bluntly. Ethan frowned, pushing his food around his plate. "I'm fine." "Liar," she shot back, leaning forward. "I talked to Claire." His head snapped up, his heart lurching. "You what?" "She told me what happened. And do you know what shocked me the most?" Emily's voice softened, but her gaze didn't waver. "That she still defended you. Even after everything, she said you weren't a bad man. Just lost." The words hit him like a blow. Lost. That was exactly what he was. Emily leaned in closer, her voice low but fierce. "You've spent your whole life building walls, Ethan. Maybe it's time you learn how to tear them down." That night, Ethan made a decision. The following Saturday, Claire answered a knock at her door. She hadn't expected him, not in her quiet neighborhood where the most exciting visitor was usually the mailman. But there he was, Ethan Cole, the untouchable CEO, standing awkwardly on her doorstep with his hands full. In one, a bouquet of simple daisies, not roses or orchids or anything ostentatious. In the other, a plain takeout bag from the little noodle shop on her block, the one she'd mentioned once in passing. "Hi," he said, his voice uncertain in a way she had never heard before. Claire blinked, caught between surprise and disbelief. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I didn't come as your old boss," he said quickly, his eyes earnest. "I came as a man who owes you more than he can ever repay. I came because I don't want to lose the only person who ever saw me, really saw me, and didn't walk away." She stared at him, stunned. Her instinct was to shut the door, to protect herself from the man who had hurt her, who had dismissed her so callously. But the sight of him, stripped of his usual arrogance, holding daisies and cheap noodles like offerings of penance, softened something inside her. "All right," she said finally, stepping aside. That evening changed everything. They ate noodles at her tiny kitchen table, the same table she used for bills and grocery lists. For once, Ethan didn't dominate the conversation with strategies or stock prices. He listened. He asked about her family, her dreams, the things she'd never shared in the glossy office tower. He told her stories of his childhood, of the boy who used to dream of building things, not just empires, and slowly, laughter found its way between them. Not the brittle laughter of forced politeness, but real, unguarded laughter. By the end of the night, when Ethan stood to leave, he paused at her doorway. "Claire, I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I just want the chance to prove I can be different." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then prove it." The weeks that followed became a quiet transformation. Ethan didn't just change in words, but in actions. He scaled back his hours at Cole Enterprises, delegating tasks he'd once hoarded. He began funding initiatives not for publicity but for impact. Small charities, community projects, He began funding initiatives not for publicity but for impact. Small charities, community projects, things Claire had always championed. He even attended his sister's charity events without reminders, showing up with a smile instead of a scowl. He showed up, and he showed up for Claire most of all. Sometimes it was as simple as bringing her coffee on her lunch break at her new job. Sometimes it was walking her home after a long day. Always it was consistent, patient, genuine. The empire still thrived, but for the first time, Ethan felt like he was living rather than just surviving. The real turning point came months later. At a gala, Claire reluctantly attended with him. The room was a sea of glittering dresses and tailored tuxedos, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions about Cole Enterprises' latest venture. Ethan ignored them all. In the middle of the crowded ballroom, he took Claire's hand. Openly, unashamedly. Claire stiffened, startled. "Ethan!" "Let them see," he said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "I spent years hiding behind walls. I don't want to hide anymore. Not from you." And in that moment, she saw not the CEO the world worshipped, but the man who had sat by her hospital bed, the man who showed up at her door with daisies and noodles, the man who was finally learning what it meant to love. Her hand tightened in his, a silent answer. And just like that, the walls began to crumble for good. Sometimes the greatest empires are not built in boardrooms, but in hearts. Ethan Cole had conquered the world, yet nearly lost himself. It wasn't wealth or power that saved him, but compassion, the kind he once dismissed, the kind Claire carried quietly until it broke through his pride. In the end, he learned what many of us forget. Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy meaning. And the true measure of a life well lived is not in the fortune we leave behind, but in the people who choose to stay beside us, even when we don't deserve them. Because sometimes, the one we push away is the very one who saves us.